Hi everyone, it's Alex from Risk Academy, and today, together with the Institute for Strategic Risk Analysis and Decision Making, I wanted to share my initial thoughts on the recently published final draft of the ISO 31000. And I guess my fundamental message is that, and the caveat before I go into the specifics of the standard, is that I truly did expect too much from the update. I mean, if you've seen some of my videos, you know I do sometimes prefer being a little bit naive, believing that the world can change for the better with the snap of a finger. In reality, of course, you know, behind every change, there's a group of people with their own vested interests. Which don't necessarily align with my um, sometimes quite controversial vision for what risk management should look like. And at the end, I will share the link to the book that is available for free, that you can, if you want to know what is my vision, that you can know, you can find out and read about my vision in the free book. So anyway, my I guess key message is that unfortunately, the quantum leap from 2009 version to 2018 version did not happen. It's a gradual change. It's a positive improvement, no doubt. Some things are still as bad as they were in 2009. And no matter what we've done, and behind the scenes, I've tried to do my bit big time. For the last 2 years, I've been responsible for collating, collecting, consolidating, formatting, and sending and preparing pretty much all of the Russian feedback to the TC262. And every single 6 months that we get an opportunity to comment on the previous drafts, we've provided a lot of comments, some requiring some fundamental changes. As you can see from the final product, majority of them have been either ignored or rejected, which is disappointing, but I guess, you know, that's how consensus kind of works. So there are few things that I wanted to share which are really positive changes, and few things which are not so good. But first, the quantum leap did not happen. The diagram that you see in front of you is fundamentally exactly the same as it was in 2009. It looks different, it has colors, but the messages are identical. And that is actually a good point for the 2009 version, is that some of the, or most of the messages in the 2009 version were actually solid good. And the best 2018 version could do is reinforce some of those great messages. So that's all well done. I wanted to quickly, while I'm on this diagram, before I go into the specific things in the text, while I'm on this diagram, I just wanted to quickly point out two things which just bug me to death. Framework, which is the thing you see on the bottom left, which is structured around leadership and commitment, and it goes through the sort of the standard PCDA or PDCA cycle. I can't remember, but you get the idea. Every single standard, or most of the standards, are structured around that same cycle. Design, implement, evaluate, improve. That really has I don't have any issue with that. Now, the thing that I've highlighted in red, which is this integration bit, it's a great idea. Like the idea was positive, and I'm very grateful that the authors felt so strong about the need to integrate, which is one of the two things I personally believe are the fundamental ideas and messages of ISO 31000, and what makes it so much better than different other standards that exist in the market, is that reinforcing the integration message is absolutely critical. But just technically sticking it as a separate specific step in the design, implement, evaluate, improve cycle just makes no sense whatsoever. And when you read the text, you see that they've just literally squeezed some text out of their thumb. It is just random words. It's meaningless. It doesn't fit into the overall logic. So the message and the intention are definitely right, but it's much better to spread that message throughout the design, implement, evaluate, and improve. Don't reinvent the wheel. The wheel. This cycle has been around for ages, and it's fine. Like, don't bolt on integration just for the sake of reinforcing the message. We get it. Like, you've done a good job reinforcing the message already. So anyway, but that's a very minor thing. Like, normally, if you've seen some of my videos, I am the last person to care about what the diagrams look like, because this is just so not important. But this is more odd than wrong. Now, the second point on this diagram, it is actually fundamentally wrong, and that just bugs me to death. Like, this is the biggest disappointment I have with the standards, and it's the last section, which is called risk management process. Now, you probably know how TC262 works. They break into working groups, and they then break into task groups. And a group of people, a smaller group of people, was responsible for each of the sections, for principles, for terminology, for framework, for risk management process. And the group working on the risk management process, I think, have done a very, very poor job. They've basically kept it the same, even though significant changes were required. So first of all, even graphically, on this diagram, it looks like the risk management process is a singular. So there's one risk management process, which is basically the problem that most of the organization faced around the world. They've literally read that risk management process is a single process that you do once a quarter, once a year, or once a month, which is, of course, is the opposite of the intention of ISO 31000, which is a standard promoting the integration of the framework into how business operates, into all business activities and decisions. And risk management processes should be applied across different decisions. Now, interestingly, and to the credit of the authors, in the actual text of the section, that is exactly what it says. It says risk management is not a single process, it's processes that need to be applied for different processes, different business processes, different decisions. Now, and you kind of you begin, even from my basic explanation of this, you begin to wonder how confusing that is, because we in the Russian feedback on numerous occasions we have proposed stop calling risk management process a process, because it's a sequence of steps, it's an algorithm or anything else that needs to be integrated into existing processes: business planning process, procurement process, forecasting process, finance processes, IT processes. So there is the disconnect. You take a process and you integrate it into a process. This makes very little sense, and makes it difficult to comprehend, because risk management is not a process in itself. It's not a standalone process, and I think that's where the root of the problem is. You called it a process in 2009, and most people implemented risk management as a standalone process. You can't say risk management is not a standalone process and then just call it a process and make it look like it's a standalone process. So that's the kind of impression I got, is that you could have done better on breaking that incorrect perception that risk management is not a standalone process, because it looks like a standalone process in this diagram, which is annoying. But again, in the text, they do kind of reinforce some of the correct messages, and I'll show you some of the positives now. So there are plenty of positive improvements, and I've tried. I basically went through the document and I've highlighted the sentences which I think are really positive in one color, and I've highlighted sentences which I think are horrible in a different color. So these are the positive things. First, it talks about the document can be used throughout the life of organization, which is the same as in 2009, and it can be applied in any activity, including decision making at all levels. This, I think, is a key difference and a very important message. Risk management should be applied according to ISO 31000 at decision making and at business activities at all levels. That means it can be and should be applied at strategic planning, at budgeting, forecasting, investment analysis, um, manufacturing forecasting, basically anything to do with uncertainty. But also quite mundane tasks and activities, procurement, your day-to-day operational decisions. This is very important because this is a distinct difference between ISO 31000 and COSO ERM, which the latest version, 2017, really went towards making risk management more a strategic prerogative, more a tool for the board members, senior managers, than a decision-making tool for everyone in the organization. Now, remember this point. It applies at all levels. That means risk management should have a set of tools that can be equally applied at all levels. For example, for strategic decision making, you would probably use simulations or Monte Carlo, or complex scenario analysis, or decision trees for that matter, which all take time and effort. But for procurement, for day-to-day operational decisions, you may use checklists and scorecards, which are much more basic and quicker to apply. That means that risk management, there will be a variety of risk management within the organization. Now, the second point is the purpose of risk management framework is to assist the organization in integrating risk management into all its activities and functions. And I think this is absolutely wonderful. This is reinforcing the main message that we at Risk Academy and ISAR have been driving for the last 7 years. This is absolutely crucial. The whole purpose of risk management through the risk management framework, which, by the way, risk management framework, despite what many organizations believe, is not a document. It's not a single document. Risk management framework is a concept of how you integrate into all activities and functions, how you integrate risk management principles into all activities and functions. So that's a very important message. Another important message is that top management and oversight bodies should ensure that risk management is integrated into all organizational activities and should demonstrate leadership and commitment. So this message of moving away from standalone risk management process, which you do once a quarter or once a year, to integrating and changing how organization performs, operates, plans, and forecasts with risks in mind, that message is continuously reinforced throughout the document. And that is a wonderful, wonderful change. And then just to continue with the same message, risk management should be a part of, not a separate from, the organizational purpose, governance, the leadership, commitment, strategy, objective, and operations. Again, reinforcing that same message. Reason being, because people are really bad at reading. Because that same message was in 2009 version. It was under principle B and C. And yet, many people seem to have missed it. So now the authors have done a wonderful job of reinforcing that message in absolutely every single paragraph, which I can only applaud to. Another really positive change is properly designed and implemented. The risk management framework will ensure that risk management process is part of all activities throughout the organization, including decision making, and the changes in external and internal context will be adequately captured. Now, that is again reinforcing that same message. Wonderful, wonderful idea. The organization should continually improve the suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness of the risk management framework and the way risk management process is integrated. So as you can see, the theme of integration is just everywhere. It's almost on every single page, which again, I repeat, is wonderful. And if you, for example, want to know how to integrate into strategic planning, or you want to know how to integrate into investment decision making, it's really easy. Just sign up to one of the free webinars that I run every week, and they are free. And I literally go through step by step on how you would integrate. Because this is what I've been talking about for the last seven years. Then next one, risk management process should be an integral part of the management and decision making. Excellent. And Finally, it says there can be many applications of the risk management process within an organization, customized to achieve objectives, to suit external and internal context, and so on. So this is a very important message. Even though graphically it looks like it's a single process, but in the text, to the credit of the authors, they do explicitly mention that in fact risk management is not a single process. It's not so this the notion of enterprise-wide risk assessment is really absolute nonsense, because risk management should be applied to different objectives, different decisions, and it may be applied differently, different time horizons, and using different tools. And finally, the second message, which I feel very strongly about, I don't think the authors did a good enough job reinforcing the importance of it. It's only mentioned twice, but they did have the objective of keeping the document short. So a lot of the information that was in the previous drafts will probably make its way to appendices or something, but it basically was deleted from the document. The dynamic and variable nature of human behavior and culture should be considered throughout the risk management process, and it also talks about human behavior and cultural aspects in one of the principles at the very beginning of the document. So this is the second message. As long as risk management has to do with people, as long as you expect people to provide information and use risk management tools for decision making, we as the risk management profession simply cannot continue to ignore over 60, now 70 years of research into risk perception, risk psychology, human behavior, and neuroeconomics. If you thought it wasn't important, there are now 2 Nobel Prize winners for the research in risk-based decision making, and or rather I should say decision making in the situations of uncertainty, in 2002 and 2017. So really there's no excuse for the risk managers to continue ignoring that research. And the authors have kind of reminded us that this is when you are providing a decision-making tool to people, well, you better understand how human mind and human brain works on the chemical level, because some of the tools like heat maps or checklists, they usually don't work as we risk professionals intend them to work. And unless you know exactly what the flaws are, you would pretty much be just lying to the management by providing them your typical risk report. And finally, there are some parts that just continue to not make much sense, and I'm a little bit disappointed, because on every single item in this list we have provided explicit commentary in the previous versions, and we've provided suggestions on how to address them, but unfortunately we were not heard. But I guess again, this is the cost of having a large group of people working on a single document. Now the first message that I think is fundamentally flawed in the standards is that in the very beginning it says the document provides guidelines on managing the risk faced by the organizations. Now this again, there are two schools of thought. Some people may think that risk management is about managing risks better. I, on the other side, think that risk management is not about managing risks per se. In fact, I strongly believe that the only person who is interested in risk as the subject of the analysis in the organization is the risk manager himself. The decision makers, the senior managers, the board, they really don't care about risk as a subject of discussion. They care about whether the decision is a good or a bad one, whether it will happen on time or will not, whether it will happen within the budget or not, whether the reputation or some other objective will be at fault, whether objectives will or will not be achieved, whether money will or will not be made. They care about other things. So continue to saying or sending the message that this standard or this guideline is all about managing risk. That really narrows the focus of the document. Well, the CEO will not read it because they don't care about managing risks. They care about meeting their strategic objectives and making money for themselves and the shareholders. So the authors could have done I feel much better by saying that the document provides guidelines on managing the organization with risks in mind. And in fact, if you look at the definition of what risk management is, this is exactly what it says. So that kind of bringing focus back to risk, I think is not doing justice to the risk management profession. Now, the next point is that risk is usually expressed in terms of sources, events, consequences, and the likelihood. Again, I think this is a very Jurassic, prehistoric way of looking at risk. There are dozens of tools that model the effect of uncertainty on objectives, and in fact, you don't even you rarely see the consequences, or let alone the likelihood of a specific risk. So continuing to think about risks in terms of consequence and likelihood really pushes you towards the wrong set of tools and instruments that you can be using. So this again, this is too narrow, and most, like literally every single modern day tool, decision trees, scenario analysis, sensitivity analysis, Monte Carlo simulations, or Leiden-Hercube simulations, none of them look at risk through the consequence or likelihood lens. So there are so many better tools that we could have used, but the definition is kind of artificially narrowing. Then the next sentence is basically me trying to say this whole section on integration, which I've highlighted at the beginning when I showed you the diagram. The intention is good. You're trying to reinforce the need for integration, but it's so artificially made, and the kind of text that the authors plugged into that section is just so artificial. And I tend to think that my level of English is sufficient to understand basic written text, but I could not comprehend what was the fundamental idea behind that particular section that was not already mentioned in other parts of the document. Like I could not just justify the existence of that extra chapter in the framework section. And also, I mean, I will have to translate parts or all of this at some stage into Russian language, and I've tried to translate, and it was absolutely intranslatable. Like the phrases and the words that were used were just incomprehensible. So that whole section, the intention is great, but it's just it's just so artificial. It has to go. It has to go, or has to be changed. Well, actually, no, it just has to go. And the final few things that really bug me is in the risk management process. It talks about the purpose of risk analysis and the purpose of risk treatment is to comprehend the nature of risk, the level of risk, and to address the risk. And that, I think, is the biggest fundamental flaw in the document. It gives readers the impression that risk is the objective in itself, that managing risk is the objective. It is not. Managing risks is a side product. It's a step in the process of making better decisions, of achieving better objectives, of performing business activities. It's not a standalone purpose in itself. So understanding the nature of risk, or let alone the level of risk, is actually absolutely irrelevant. Well, actually, understanding the nature of risk, I take that back. That's very important. But understanding the level of risk is actually absolutely irrelevant. Because again, as I mentioned, the proper tools that we use, you don't need to understand whether the risk is red, amber, or green. There are better tools like decision trees and Monte Carlo simulations that help you achieve your objectives and restructure your strategy, restructure your investment projects much better without this whole talk about what the actual level of risk is. So this, to me, is putting unnecessary emphasis on risk, making us wrongly believe that it's all about managing risks, which of course it isn't. So that's my feedback. To sum up, the section on principles is great. It could have been better. We've actually provided some feedback from Russia on rephrasing each of the principles so it's more focused for the business reader and less focused for the risk reader. That hasn't been done, so it's still very risk focused, which basically means it will not be read by anyone outside of the risk profession, which is a disappointment. And the framework section is great. There are some inconsistencies, but all in all, it's driving that message of integration, which is absolutely amazing. The section on the risk management process, I think, is an absolute fail, and it talks about doing risk assessments for the sake of risk assessments. It really gives that impression of risk assessments for the sake of risk assessments. The description of the steps you take is really not aligned with the more modern tools that exist. And when I say modern tools, I mean, it's kind of embarrassing. Those modern tools have been created much earlier than heat maps and your risk, probability, likelihood matrices. They've actually existed since 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, but yet the risk management profession seems to continue to ignore them. So those are my key messages. And to wrap up, I wanted to apply the Norman Marks test, which he applied to COSO ERM. I think it equally applies to ISO 31000. And I wanted to quickly apply that and just to give you my thoughts on that. It's not as bad as, it's not as good as Jimmy Kimmel test, but we'll use it for this analysis. So Norman Marks provided a set of questions, which basically, by answering which, you can get a sense whether a document is a good document or it's not as good as you hope or as the market needs. So the first question: does the update provide useful guidance that will help leaders of the organization define mission, objectives, strategies, plans, and so on? And my answer is no, it doesn't. It provides useful information and guidance to the risk managers, but I just do not see CEOs, board members using it as a tool, as a practical guidance for them defining, setting missions, objectives, strategies, and plans. So the language, even though the authors have claimed that they want to broaden the scope and they want to broaden the audience of the document, they most definitely did not do that. They do not talk the business language. They just continue using the same risk jargon that was used all along. Does the update provide useful guidance when it comes to the next question? Does the update provide the useful guidance when it comes to executing against the mission, objectives, strategies, and plans? Is there sufficient guidance on effective decision making? And will it move the practice of risk management away from only reviewing periodically a list of risks? That's a tough question because this is very similar to COSO ERM 2017. In the beginning, it kind of claims that it does, but when you look at the specific, like the specific step-by-step in the process section, you see that no, it doesn't. It's actually continuing doing exactly the same thing, and the same thing was periodically reviewing a list of risks. So unfortunately, it claims that it provides sufficient guidance to effective decision making, but I mean, unfortunately, some of the authors clearly have not researched how decision-making theories evolved and what decision-making quality looks like, because the decision-making actually consists of different steps. Like, this is just the fundamental difference. When you apply risk management to decision-making, you don't go identify, assess, mitigate. Like, this is just the irony of the whole thing. Identification is the second. You go assess uncertainty, and then you identify risks, because that's what your tornado diagram tells you. So, like, it's evident that the document is still in the same sequence of steps that was used for the periodic review of list of risks. It actually doesn't apply the tools and the knowledge that we have in decision-making theory, which is disappointing, which is very disappointing. And I think that's one of the reasons why I felt a lot more disappointment than excitement about this new draft. Will the guidance still lead people to only identify, assess, and address potential harms? Will risk reporting still be focused on level of risk rather than the likelihood of achieving each objective? Now, there are two questions here. On the first one, will the guidance still lead people to identify potential harms? No, it won't. The ISO 31000, even since 2009, has been explicit that risk is effect of uncertainty, positive and negative. It's actually really good on that. However, will risk reporting still be focused on level of risk? Unfortunately, yes, which is again a fundamental flaw, because I mean, some of the more advanced risk managers, we've stopped doing risk reports ages ago, unless somebody from the board or senior manager explicitly asks for a report on a specific risk, like a change in legislation or something else. We don't do risk reports. We integrate risk information into standard performance reporting, and we show how likely is the achievement of each of the objectives and how we're progressing across each of the objectives with risks in mind. Now, there is a section on reporting which is quite generic. You could argue that it kind of fits, but we know it doesn't, because the section on process still talks about risk levels and identifying, assessing, and mitigating risks, which unfortunately, again, is a disappointment. How the guidance explain Does the guidance explain clearly and help decision makers understand and evaluate all the potential effects of uncertainty? Does it look at broad spectrum? I think yes, it does. It never really. It's not. It's so high level that it doesn't really narrow to just positive or just negative. It talks holistically about what the different potential effects of uncertainty may be. So yes, that's a good point. Will the update provide decision makers with the structure process they need to decide whether to take the risk because the potential for reward? Again, the intention was there. The beginning definitely promises to deliver, but the risk management process section does not deliver. The actual step-by-step guidance on how to do is different to what decision makers usually apply when making a decision. So the risk management process is basically not aligned with the standard decision-making methodologies, theories, and practices. So the result will be is that risk decision makers will not apply ISO 31000 when making a decision, and the risk managers will again be forced to apply ISO 31000 on some sort of periodic basis after the decision has been made. Will the update lead to providing decision makers with the guidance on how the guidance they need if they are to make the decisions management and the board wants them to make? Will the update lead to provide decision makers with the guidance they need if they are to make the decisions? Not 100% sure what's behind this question, so I will skip it for the sake of this discussion. Does the update provide sufficient guidance on how to assess and then correct as necessary the culture of the organization? That's a very good point. It doesn't really. It kind of mentions that the culture needs to be taken into account when analyzing, identifying risks, and integrating the framework, but it doesn't explicitly talk about, well, in monitoring, it mentions that you need to look at culture as well and the human aspects. But because the document is so high level, so I'll probably give it 50-50. It provides high level phrases that you can fit it into, but it doesn't provide any specifics, it doesn't provide any sufficient, what you would call sufficient guidance. But then again, to be fair, it doesn't provide sufficient guidance on any of the other topics as well, because it's just so high level. Does the update provide sufficient guidance on each stage of the risk management process, including identification? Does it provide sufficient guidance on communication monitoring, including continuous improvement? Well, yes, it does. Does in full. Is the updated guidance on risk appetite and risk tolerance useful? Does it mirror or enable effective decision making in real life? To establish not only the upper limit of risks that should be taken, but the lower level. Again, the update is very high level, so it doesn't go into explicit details on that. If you've seen my videos or read my articles, you know my take on risk appetite. I think it's absolute nonsense when applied in traditional risk appetite statement type, because there are much better ways of doing risk appetite. Luckily, I guess for me, the ISO 31000 doesn't actually talk about risk appetite a lot, but you can see when it talks about risk criteria and in a couple of other sections when they talk about understanding what risks should be taken and how much of that risk should be taken. It covers the concept, so it's again, it's quite sufficient in that sense. Keeping in mind that it's very high level, so it doesn't explicitly answer the question that Norman is posing. Will it be possible to assess the effectiveness of risk management in practice using the updated version? That's a very good question. I think ISO 31000 final draft has actually done a wonderful job on that, because they've provided both the purpose and the kind of the vision of what effective risk management should look like, and it talks about all about integration. Again, because it's so high level, it doesn't give you specific step-by-step instructions on how to actually do it and what to look for, but it definitely sets the right tone and gives you the right direction. And we've developed in G31000 a maturity model which explicitly goes into 150 pages of specific things you would look at to justify whether it's embedded, whether it's integrated, and whether that integration is in fact effective or not. Will the guidance provide sufficient guidance to enable the board and committee of the board to provide effective oversight? Again, probably yes. It's on one side, it's quite high level. On the other side, it does explicitly talk about oversight bodies for the first time. So it actually goes into some level of detail, which is wonderful. Is the updated document consumable? Definitely yes, it is. It is very short, very high level. Unfortunately, will not be understood by all, and definitely not acted on by all levels of the organization, because it's short, it's simple for the risk managers. Other executives, other senior managers, board members, they will read and think they understand what this means, but I'm very doubtful the key messages will get across. Will the updated product help busy executives and board members understand what is risk management all about and what it's not simply a compliance exercise? I think it will do a better job than both COSA ERM 2017 and ISO 2009. Could have been better. Is the 2000 product sharp improvement on the 2009 version? I wouldn't say sharp improvement. It's a significant improvement. However, the last section on risk management process is just as bad as it used to be. So on some aspects, it's a significant improvement. On others, unfortunately, didn't do a good enough job. And I've promised, if you want to know what's my vision is, what's my vision for integration is, well, the Guide to Effective Risk Management has been downloaded over 13,000 times now. It's available for free on Risk Academy. Go to the website. On the top right, there's a link called Download Free Book, and feel free to use it.